Please be aware this will be a spoiler-filled discussion. Hello and welcome to the Minority Arts Appreciation Society, where we're ticking all the boxes and providing the much-needed minority perspective in popular internet discourse. I'm Mattie, my pronouns are she and her, and I lead the film discussions.
I'm Josh, my pronouns are he and him, and I lead the music discussions.
And this week we're coming back at you with a new film discussion. That is I Walk on Water by auteur Kalikala. This is a series of vignettes and interviews and what's been deemed social realist photography and cinematography that sort of paints a portrait of modern day Harlem, Brooklyn, and also reflects the life and journeys of the director himself, Kalikala. Our guy Kalikala has done some work on Beyonce's Lemonade, which was pretty cool. He was a cinematographer. It really
Yeah, that makes sense. Though I
it
definitely felt
makes
some lemonade in here.
it makes so much sense. Especially I really wouldn't be surprised if he was responsible for a lot of those like wide multiple people portrait shots in Lemonade. You know, where especially in like the second half when it featured a lot of people in like period dress.
Yeah, the
Uh,
shots of nature as well
yeah,
are
that's really
very
true.
similar.
That's really true. Uh, and so yeah, this film's visual element I think is pretty indicative of Lemonade's visual, pretty reflective of Lemonade's visual elements,
Mm.
and also the structure of it as well. Because while Lemonade is a string of music videos, a lot of the time there seems to be some level of separation between the film's audio and video. And I Walk on Water follows this throughout its 3 hour and 20-minute run length. It is a lot of the time just showing you footage that he's captured on nights of filming that he's describing himself during the film, and it's really quite something. But yeah, I think what I can say this film most made me feel like is like taking part in an art exhibition, wandering around and just kind of taking it all in. So I think I want to make our discussion a little bit like that. Less a fun debate between our opinions and more a discussion about what worked and what didn't, and most importantly, just how it made us feel.
Yeah.
Um, and I want to take a laid back approach because I feel like this film can be roughly broken down into three sections, uh,
Mm.
with the structure of conversations existing just to like frame their discussions, being the consistent thing throughout this film. Uh, and there's a section on his friend Frenchie, and I think the second would be on his relationship with Camilla, and finally, it's just a series of discussions of his ideas and his philosophy. And I think
I,
like in discussing all of this, like I want to say that like nothing is sacred. I'm not assuming that anything is like meaningful inherently. I want it to like stand on its own grounding, and I want to spend a lot of time almost talking about the ideas separately from what we think of the art itself, although that might be difficult to do. And I'm also curious to hear from you, Josh, and how you want this discussion to go,
I,
given
I,
how
I have no
unconventional
interest
it
in like
is.
controlling the form of the discussion.
That's
It's
cool.
interesting. I feel like I see what you mean by having an art gallery feel because it is pretty much edited together photography for 3 hours and 20 minutes,
Mm.
with audio conversations and stuff put over it. Like there's never a shot of someone talking and the audio syncing up with their mouths. Like it's always photography that was taken and after the fact audio had been edited to
Yeah.
match the moment. Um, but I see what you mean of like separating it into the parts of like Frenchie, Camilla, and then like Kalik's philosophy. Um I do feel like there was after after like 2 hours, I do feel like it became clear to me that it actually did feel quite cohesive in terms that I do feel like overall this film is about his relationship with Frenchie
Yeah,
and Camilla.
absolutely.
And you described it like an art gallery, And I kind of agree. It does feel like going through an art gallery of socialist real social real social realist photography of Harlem. Except Kalikala is your guide, and he's going to talk to you for 3 hours. And I, I I'm very sorry. I'm sorry. I'm going to be the dissenting opinion on this
No,
pod, I
no.
assume, because everyone seems to adore this film, and I understand why. But after the 2 hours and I think
Yeah.
maybe 30 minutes, I realized I actually really don't like Kalikala as a person. Uh,
I'm not surprised. I just want to put that out there. I wasn't watching this thinking, yeah, Josh is really gonna fuck with this.
no,
I'm not
that's
surprised.
cool. But it was a weirdest film experience of like normally you
Mm.
watch like a 3 hour plus film. There's that sunk cost fallacy thing of you get to the 3 hour mark and it's like, well, I have to have enjoyed this because this has been like such a
Yeah,
long journey. But the longer it went on, the more of Kalik's personality came through. And everyone like, man, I really don't like this guy. And it kind of
yeah,
like the themes and motifs from earlier in the film, in the first hour or so that I was really digging. Like I really like his photography, and I'll get into like why became tainted by just, in my opinion, him being quite obnoxious and up his
yeah,
own ass. Um, and chauvinistic.
yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
and yeah, so it was a really weird viewing experience for me in that way.
I actually agree with you quite a lot. I found myself wanting to love this film more than actually loving it, if that makes sense. It
Mm,
reached because I really fell in love with that first 90 minutes. I'll be honest, like really did enjoy all of that. But then as it went on and I just felt like it became more and more repetitive, I
mm,
became more and more frustrated, and it was really honestly quite painful because I not really quite painful, but quite conflicting because yeah, here I was in this film that I once loved, but there was an hour and 40 minutes left. Perhaps I think that's right. Maybe 110 minutes left. 110 minutes left, and uh, like that's a lot. That will do a lot to hurt a film
mm,
for you. And I think there are a lot of ideas in this film that stand on their own.
mm.
However, the man they're coming from seems to think that those ideas stand on their own because they're coming from him, is what I would say. So you
Yeah.
have this really weird dissonance between the fact that a lot of what he's saying and doing is really good, especially I'm saying most of this I'm talking about the first half,
Dude,
and then
I was pretty much with it for the first like 2 hours.
yeah,
Like I was really
I would agree
shocked
with
with
it.
the last hour it lost to me. Like in a
it
big way. I was really
yeah,
shocked.
yeah. So
Yeah.
yeah, you have this dissonance
Mm,
where it's like, oh, but I like what he's saying, but why am I getting less and less out of this? It's because like you put it perfectly, you get more of a sense of what he thinks about the world and what he thinks about more telling things than all of these grand ideas. The film becomes, I think, genuinely a bit more grounded later on.
mm.
And so when you hear his ideas about more grounded things, I think that's the stuff that's really quite telling about people. And the stuff that's quite telling about people, I just found quite difficult to engage with. He kind of seems like a drifter who um attributes a lot of meaning to things, and because he's a great artist he manages to find it, but there's still that inherent obnoxious quite narcissistic goal of creating meaning in the first place that I feel like kind
Well,
of
it's not
puts
it's not
a dampener on it.
yeah, and I want to say the stuff I like before I get into my gripes.
Yeah,
But to respond to the kind of your reference to like the narcissistic goal, for me it wasn't so much his like goal to attribute meaning to stuff, but to be the bringer of meaning, the bearer of meaning. There's
that's what
lots
I'm
of
trying to
parts,
say.
yeah, there's
Yeah,
lots of parts in the film where he says that he's Jesus and he compares what he's doing with, and at first I thought it was just him being like funny and like messing around with his mum. But he really does seriously compare what he's doing with
the work of Christ.
oh, I'm trying to remember his name, sorry. The other main character of the film.
Frenchie.
Frenchie, yeah. he really does compare what he's doing with Frenchie to Christ. And I think we should problematize how this film frames Frenchie in a bit. But first of all, like stuff I really like about the film, especially like because this is my first exposure to Khalik Allah's photography. I wasn't like I hadn't encountered him before.
Mm.
And just to talk about like his photography, I really like his approach to social realism. It reminds me of so for listeners who haven't seen his photography, a lot of it is pretty much like New York dark Harlem streets and close-ups, like hyper close-ups on typically like working class and typically black faces. And usually the blacks are very like the blacks of the background, you know, if you think about like a Mike Mignola comic like Hellboy, where he really uses black as a color that frames the scenes. That I think
Mm.
Kalikala does that as well, and there's these deep purple blacks in the background, you know, like the film Moonlight, um, and the faces, and it's like kind of highlights the faces of the people you're looking at, and it's sort of to me it reminded me of the philosopher Levinas, who writes about the face of the other as a call to like responsibility and ethics, right? Like when you're on the street and you see a homeless person, uh, confronting their face is a very intense moment, and it's very like difficult.
Mm.
And Zadie Smith, who's an author I really love, writes in her book White Teeth about what it's like to be from London and to like not be homeless. And there's this feeling of like fear towards like strung out drug addict homeless people who roam the streets.
The
And
other.
yeah, and she says she writes from a character's perspective who knows it's wrong to feel a bit perturbed by these people, but subconsciously feels like they know something about me that I don't know, and like they're gonna like if they get me down, you know, they'll reveal my hypocrisy and that I'm a piece of shit and I can't help them, and just I'll be found out, like you know, like that perpetual guilt we carry by not being homeless all the time. Um, and this one really captures this his photography really captures that confronting of the face, the all the feelings, you know, because in my life, you know, I don't really spend a lot of time looking at homeless people as intently as his photography asks you to. So that's what I really dug with the first with you know his photography style,
Mm.
uh, and capturing these moments, these people, and centering them. I really love his portraits for that reason.
It's incredibly bold, uh, and yet it just forces you to confront your own personal beliefs and your own personal feelings when you see these people. Because what I really liked about what you brought up just there, Josh, is like the immediacy of that feeling and the fact that it's not a belief so much as a feeling, and that really illustrates how much these people have been demonized by society. It's not simply just a system of thoughts that we have when we see these people. Like I use we in the most general sense of the term, uh, but yeah, a, a human like hormonal reaction, and that's very powerful, and that's very indicative of who people are. And
Mhm.
so I think that what this film does incredibly well, as you just put it, Josh, is humanize those people, and it's one of the testaments to its style. Just that you must simply look, and I don't need to make it sound like this film is like, look at these people, they're so unpleasant to look at. I just mean that um if we're being honest about how society frames these people, um it's in a completely demonizing way, and I think it's really beautiful seeing that being flipped and just showing their humanity and their everyday interactions. Like you brought up, very I don't want to get into this yet, I do want to get into this later as well. But I just want to mention it sort of early. Is yeah, like you said, there are some iffy elements of framing his relationship with Frenchie that is worth getting into, but there's also I don't know, that first half also just has the most, I don't know, interesting and actually relevant feeling discussions of ethics and philosophy, and I think the most telling social situations as well. So yeah, Josh, do you want to respond to the stuff I've just said?
Yeah, and you said that his style works to humanize these people and turn what we usually avert our gaze from when we walk down the street into the subject of high art. Um, Ultimately, I think the film will fail at humanizing Frenchie. It will do other things of Frenchie that I don't think are quote unquote humanizing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but just one last thing I'll say about what I really love about his style is the way he captures skin tone. Uh, the blacks of the blacks of their skin, you know, the skin of black people, uh, are really like deepened and darkened in how he uses lighting in his photography. That
Mm-hmm.
reminds me a lot of like Jordan Peele's work in Us. There's an amazing shot in Us of the moment when the little girl, right at the beginning, you know, the cold opening, goes down
Oh,
to the spooky place and opens the door and sees the spooky thing, which I won't spoil if you haven't seen Us.
it's a
And
great first half.
and
Yeah.
it captures her face, and the background of it is this bluish black, and her face kind of blends in with the background a bit in that coloring, and then the whites of her eyes are so bright and vivid, and she looks so dark, like her skin looks so dark. And I
Mm-hmm.
love when black directors heighten the darkness of black skin, because obviously, you know, colorism is rampant, and dark black skin is taboo and kind of viewed as like scary or more dangerous. So I really love when
Mm-hmm.
black directors play with that, and like, you know, will that shot be more scary to you because she looks so dark? And what does that say about how we've internalized things about race? So I really like what he does with skin tone and lighting as well. I'm not a film student or photography student, um, uh, but I appreciate that aspect of his work.
No, I mean, well, this is one thing I wanted to get onto is like we're two different perspectives, and I feel like this film functions on two different levels that you know, I wouldn't want to ever entirely separate from each other, but this discussion is also similar to that, where there's two halves of the same whole, and there's the filmmaker capturing the people and the discussions and just the conversations, you know, about just like, I'm gonna go and get you some food now and do this. But yeah, so like the film, there's uh us, there's me who talks more about the structure, the making, and that kind of thing. Even though you've said some really brilliant things about the way this film looks and is presented, but also I'm really happy to have you here because of your knowledge of philosophy. And I feel like one thing that a lot of people because I did look quite a lot into the reception of this film, and I feel like a lot of people frame this film's success around its provocations, its discussions of ethics and philosophy. Not that they, you know, not that this film is like a thesis. There's not one idea in here that this film is structured around, but there is very intentionally a number of discussions about art and about society and about how we frame both of those things within art and within society, that I'm really glad to have you around for. I think one of my favorite things that was said in this film in regards to that kind of topic was when one of the interviewees was discussing survival skills, specifically about surviving racism in America, and how there's this almost like hereditary knowledge of survival skills that is relevant, and is changed by your race and your class. So he compares like growing up black and poor in America and the different skills you will be taught by the age you're like 7 or 8 versus someone who is like middle class and white. And he's not talking about like, you know, this is how you make money, this is a way to make rent by the end of the month, but like spiritual soul survival skills. And I found that really touching as a queer person as well, because it's you think about the way that you train yourself to live in society. um and there's a very quick line in this discussion that this person brings up, and he says these survival skills aren't necessarily good or bad. And I feel like what this film poses really interestingly is the reconciling of difficult truths about living in the modern world with, and just essentially resolving the tension between that just by accepting that there is that difficulty there. Because, so to apply that to this example, there are things you must do and believe to survive today if you've grown up like this, that you can't apply value judgments to, because they're about survival, they're not about living. And yeah, I just wanted to point that out because I just found that really touching, uh, because it simultaneously applies to so many people, but the example that he poses it in is also so unique and specific to this environment. And that idea of it being a legacy that has been passed down from parent to child and has evolved from parent to child is unique to that experience. And I think that's really powerful and is an example of one of the like best things about this film.
Yeah, I like that speech too. And for me, I didn't really, the part by Hereditary didn't really strike me as much.
Hmm.
The bit of that speech that really got me was there's this line about falling. You know, how do black people survive? And it's like, well, he likens it to air pressure. It's like, you know, we're constantly falling,
Yeah.
and you know, the way I looked at it, what we were saying was that you don't really think about gravity because the falling kind of becomes the water. Like that's the status quo. That's how you operate. That's how the world looks. Um, and it's not even at that point. It's survival is just it's just baseline. Like
Yeah.
the extreme is normal, which is how you know all minorities and underclasses feel. So
Yeah.
so that aspect of the speech really resonated with me.
It's a wonderful speech. It was just that I just that honesty about like these survival skills, they're not good, they're not bad, they just exist. Is there any other kind of vignettes or speeches or interviews that really struck you in in more of a positive way before we maybe talk a bit more about our problems with the film?
A lot, it's so much, and a lot of it is really hard to hear. Like
Yeah.
I didn't have sub. Did you get subtitles in yours?
Nope.
I
I
did not have
that was something I
subtitles.
was going to bring up. Um,
Um,
Not in like a "Arr,"
wait, no,
independent
because he's
filmmaker.
talking to like drug addicts who don't have teeth. Like they're gonna be hard to understand sometimes. And I'm not. I
Yeah.
mean, I have family members who are like this. Like I'm not. Yeah. Like,
Oh, not even. I just genuinely think
do
at
you know what I
times
mean?
the like microphone quality is just
Oh yeah.
like the sound he just didn't put enough time into. Like
Mm,
legit, that's all I was saying. Because I just
yeah.
like I
That
don't know.
too. Yeah.
He's
Yeah.
recording out a lot in the street, and it is just like sometimes it's like I really like that. I
Yeah.
wouldn't want to take that away, but
Yeah.
you got to make compensations for it.
Honestly, you know that one that guy who did the "How do black people survive" speech. My other notes of good talky bits are also like from that guy. Like
Yeah.
there's a bit about he says the black community has been broken down morally, and there's this idea that normal social revolutions like sex and drugs can't be experimented with in the black community in a healthy way as much as the wealthy white community can.
Oh
So
yeah.
he says that like when a Harvard kid goes to school and like you know, does the social network thing, does the partying, the drugs, the sex. If anything goes wrong, like if they end up a drug addict, they have like a really good support network to get them to rehab and get them help. And obviously they might
Mm.
still, you know, die, but there's a support network there, and they're viewed as like a person still, a person with a disease. Whereas like uh working class kids, and he's about the black community, but I do think it applies to like most working class people.
Mm.
Once you mess up with drugs, uh, you're just viewed as a junkie, like a nitty. Like you're not.
Yeah.
There's no support. Like,
It's over. It's
and you know
over.
that's why. Yeah, So that part is really good, and there was some nice talks about gentrification, and this
Oh yeah.
idea that like college kids come from their college and try to turn the place they're gentrifying into the same kind of atmosphere as their college. And
Mm.
like, man, I feel this shit, man. Especially being from Peckham, seeing Peckham slowly become like some cool hip center
Makes
of
me very sad.
hanging out. I've decided
And
I'm just not gonna fucking hang out with these bars anymore, man. Fuck them. Anyway,
yeah, I
but
fucking agree with you. I get a bit more sad
um,
every time I come home to Peckham about it.
uh, uh, yeah. Another bit I thought was really cute was the part where he goes back to talk to his mum, and she's like, "What's the film about?" And he's like, "Yeah, I'm just shooting everyday stuff, in Harlem. I'm gonna call the film Camilla." And his mum's
Oh
like,
yeah.
"Oh, if it's called Camilla, like, should it be about Camilla?" And he's like, "No, man, it's just called Camilla. Like, it's not necessarily about her." I found it really curious. In the end, the film ended up being called "I Walk on Water,"
Mm,
rather than Camilla. I was curious as to when that change happened or why it happened. Uh,
yeah. And the fact that he left that in the film as well.
mm,
It's a very unflinching portrait of his life. I'll give him the one
mm,
last
yeah.
thing I want to say, if you're done,
Mm.
if you're all good,
Yeah, I'm done. I'm done.
is I what you said about the discussion of like support networks and
Mm,
how poverty uh like culturally affects people, because
mm,
I really just love the use of cultural and artistic mediums to talk about the cultural implications of political problems, because there are spaces, and like I'm not saying that they should only be that film should be confined to only discussing these kind of problems and these kind of consequences of political situations, but I find it so just touching, and well, not touching, I think I find it more direct, and I think there are like places where the political implications of these kind of things are very much um happening, and there's a lot of time given to that, and so it's just I'm just saying I think it's very good to see the human alienation that happens when you have problems like that, like because these are modern facts of existence. People do these things, they're immersed around them, and it happens to people, and because of just where people happen to end up,
yeah.
or it's a completely different experience, and it's so dark that one thing for one person can be so light, so easy to come back from, and just whereas for another person, the implications on their soul and on their life, on the imprint they leave on the world, is just irreversibly affected. And it's just really good to see things like that being told on film.
Yeah. Well, that's it. Those are my positive opinions. I'm gonna drag you into the gutter now. So
Hell
yeah,
yeah.
my least favorite thing about the film is Khalik himself, Kalikala. And we mentioned that the title from Camilla changed to "I Walk on Water," and I think it's really telling that they went from being named after presumably the love of his life, his wife,
Yeah.
um,
And
to
his
his
collaborator.
collaborator, to "I Walk on Water," which is a reference to Jesus, which is a reference to Khalik Allah, because he
He's Jesus.
he is Jesus, and I want to go through like the gradual kind of, in my view of him, degradation of like, oh man,
I would love
I can't believe I have to spend another hour and a half with this person.
I
So
would love to join you on that journey.
it starts the conversation with the mum, and this was like the first part of the film I felt where his voice and personal life really started coming through. Um, and it's a cute conversation. And he's talking to his mom about like, yo, man, what if I told you that I am Christ? She was like, oh man, you can't say shit like that. Like, come on, dude. And he's like, nah, man, I've been in the woods, man. I've been doing mushrooms, mom. Like, you don't get it. Like, I'm Christ. And she's like, it really worries me when you say things like that, son.
She's
makes
so
me upset.
earnest.
Yeah, and it seemed like she's been like fuddy duddy, right? Uh, and then as it went on, you get to the bit, and I didn't think much of this. I just thought it was like a funny scene. And you get to the Camilla scene, which is
I'm very glad you brought that up. Yeah.
visually probably my favorite scene in the film. The photography he took of Camilla in the different locations and the way he cuts between it and then pauses at significant moments, it's just so gorgeous to me. But him actually, like as a person in this conversation, is pretty trash.
Yeah.
There's this, Camilla. It's like her speech is amazing. She gives this speech about how uh they're kind of beginning to argue. She's kind of tired, and he's like, I want to keep shooting. I got this lens
Yeah.
and I haven't used it much. I just want to
And
go
he's still on
home.
mushrooms.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he's on mushrooms. And she's like, hey, I just want to go to bed. And he's like, okay, you can go to bed. I'm going to keep walking around shooting. And she's like, you don't know this area. Like, you doing that means I have to stay out with you. And it's like, clearly he's doing like some weird manipulation tactic to like either make her feel bad
Yeah.
or make her stay out. And then she's saying that it upsets her that they can't have, he doesn't feel like she looks at her. He only sees her through like the lens. Kind of similar to what we talked about with Malcolm and Marie about men viewing women as kind of
I
muses and
I wrote
abstracting
down the
them
same thing.
from their personness. And he's like, and he and he's kind of trying to defend himself, like saying that no, the lens is art, and like I see you through art, and that's the same as seeing you. And then, but there's this line where he's like, "You're younger than me, like you can't really understand how I see you," and it's just really like condescending and gross.
Yeah.
And eventually, she starts crying, and she talks about like how she's worried about like how many drugs he's doing, and kind of like just like how she is frustrated that she feels like she spends a lot of time following him around
Hmm.
when they travel, and like she's kind of sidelined a bit. And that's when I started getting like bad vibes from him. And I had that like, do you know the thing of like, so I think King Cruel's a wonderful person, but you have a odd bias against King Cruel because you think there are people in our like druggy artsy friendship group who remind you of him. And that's how I feel about Khalik. Like I
I
know
got the
people like
same
him,
vibe. I got the
like
exact same thing.
stoner kids who like are really self-aggrandizing and they're good at art, but the fact that they know they're good at art is really gross and annoying.
Yeah.
Um, and
I
yeah,
think that's my
from then
problem
on, I
with
was just
him.
anti.
Yeah. That's my problem with him and the dissonance that I was trying to get at earlier. Because on one hand, yeah, he did some great stuff in that first half, but I'm going to be honest, the bad vibes really set in that mum conversation for me because she just it is really funny, but she just sounded so upset, and
Yeah.
in her voice there seemed to be this sadness
Mm,
of a long-term problem,
mm,
and it really sounds like there's something quite serious going on, because she kind of says like, I don't like it when you say this stuff, implying that he's been saying it for quite some time, or at least the past, couple months or something. And I don't know, a mother's concern is a very powerful thing.
mm.
And I think it just seems to me that he has become a bit lost in this character that he's created of himself. The idea that he is Jesus starts off as a relatively harmless idea. I think there's a previous interaction with Frenchie where he calls Frenchie God. He's like, "You are God, and
Yeah,
I'm
like
God."
we all are God
And
inside of
and
us. Or something, yeah.
and I, as a very like surface level, like I don't have any like moral problems with a statement like that.
Yeah, yeah.
But it quickly within that conversation with his mother becomes a far more literal idea of I am Christ,
Mm.
and that combination with the drugs, it really on in one moment is very difficult to listen to and take this man as seriously as I have been for the past 90 minutes. But on the other hand, my brain is also thinking, but he put this in this film. He was choosing to put this to screen. And what does that mean? I,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
it's so difficult because this film is a diary film, and I guess in a sense therefore autobiographical, and
100%.
it's one of the
It's
most
about him.
honest. Yeah, it's one of the most honest biographical films I've ever seen because all of him is here. And I'm probably at this point no longer talking about Khalik. I'm talking about the film, which I guess is what we're here to do, and kind of in line with what
This
we
film is
discussed
about
about.
Khalik, and
Yeah, this film
that
is
is the
about
issue. Is
Khalik.
I feel like reviews acting like this is wholeheartedly about Harlem and capturing the spirit of
Yeah.
this area. But if you sit through the entire 3 hours, it's about Khalik being a cool photographer who goes to Harlem. Like that's what it's about.
Yeah. No, it is, and I do think yes, although it's a honest and unflinching portrait of himself, he's still doing that. This is a film that's very honest about the authorship that is happening here, but that doesn't undercut who he is.
Mm.
And if this film is about him and who he is becomes increasingly like misogynistic is a strong word, but I don't like how he
Okay,
treats women.
I I I I want to hit the kind of I'm gonna hit this
Um,
chauvinistic point real quick. I think it's best summarized in a scene that makes me sympathize with police people. Because there's a scene where he's trying to get, and this is gonna lead into Frenchie nicely. Actually, he's trying to get Frenchie in the car with him to like, I guess,
mm,
hang out. And Frenchie's just like asking for money, and he's like, "I'm not gonna get in the car." He's like, "No, we're gonna go to the bank. We're gonna get money." And Frenchie's kind of getting a bit aggy at this point, right? Uh, and then some cops come up, and they're like, "Hey, is everything okay? Like, we know Frenchie, and like sometimes people take advantage of like vulnerable people, and like we try and check out see if everything's okay." And he's like, "Oh yeah, no, everything's fine." Like, and then as the cops are walking away, you know, he says to the female cop, he compliments her and says, "Oh, you're really pretty," which is
yeah.
a gross thing to do. Um, it undermines her authority, and he's constantly undermining women. This he undermines his mother by not validating her concern for him. He
Mm-hmm.
undermines his wife by saying that she's too young to understand gaze or how he sees her, which is really fucking condescending. And then yeah, he jokes around with his friends about like, oh, I wonder if the other cop is smashing her. Like I'd smash her. I can't remember if he's saying it between him and his friends, but it's that kind of dude conversation, you know?
Yeah, and he's still in that environment.
Yeah, and it just sucks, dude. And then the stuff with Frenchie, there's an ongoing thing in the film about uh his mum says, "Hey, like I'm not super happy with you bringing like Frenchie to the house." And at first I was like really on his side, like, "Hey, no, it's cool that he's like hanging out with the homeless people and bring
Yeah,
them in." But then
I
he
felt
he
the
compares
same.
himself to like, "No, but Jesus washed the feet, ma. Jesus washed the feet." As if I, and then later on he talks about like how he wants to be more like Frenchie. Deep down Frenchie is like pure because like he doesn't eat ever and he's fasting and that makes him like godly inside. And the core problem I have with the treatment of how he talks about Frenchie in this film is that it's an overcorrection of our avoidant
Yes.
attitude towards kind of
Yes.
homeless people to a point of like fetishizing Frenchie. Like Frenchie becomes exoticized by him, like the magical other. And like Frenchie isn't eating because he is homeless and has no money, but he
Yeah.
turns that into like, no, that's what
He
makes him
calls
dope
it
though. That's what makes him holy and spiritual. And
he
it's
calls it
really,
fasting.
yeah, fasting. And it's fetishism, and I really
Yeah.
don't fuck with it. And because of that, by the end of the film, I've completely turned against it because everything I liked about
No.
it is just completely gone, pretty much.
Yeah, that portrait of Harlem and on honesty becomes a like descendant of the like an I don't know, like an acolyte of the bourgeoisie coming in and fetishizing everyone's pain because Frenchie, I'm happy that Frenchie has found some form of acceptance in a society that ridicules and belittles him at every turn. Uh, but at the same time, there's deep pain behind that rejection, and there's obviously I believe it comes up what's happened to him during his life, and the reasons he is where he are now are not good things, and I think it's a wonderful thing to normalize, or well, to culturally. Okay, normalize is the wrong word.
Yeah, I don't get the spiritual justification of homelessness.
Yes, that's
I
it.
get it.
Thank you. The spiritual justification. It's incredibly like patronizing, and it's something. Well, personally, I just feel like Khalik tries to, instead of make something understandable for the audience, Khalik tries to impose his understanding onto the audience. And that's my problem with it. And so his portrait of Harlem isn't really an honest portrait. It is, this is how I see all of those people, and this is how me framing this legitimizes myself as some kind of prophet. Really, I think he sees himself as a prophet, which is wrapped up in ego. At one point he references the Sermon on the Mountain, referencing the prophet Moses, and like obviously the Sermon on the Mountain is the origin of the 10 Commandments, and God, it's just, there is no end to this man's ego. And it goes from a like detached portrait of a filmmaker's relationship with his community to someone very recognizable, someone that me and Josh have seen in our social circles, and someone that we wouldn't really fuck with. And that change is so dramatic and damning for the implications of this film that, yeah, I guess I'm just going to go into my recommendation that I wouldn't recommend it. Josh, if you would like to do your closing thoughts.
I'm at a week not recommend. I recommend you look at his photography on his, I assume, website or Google Images because it's quite good. But yeah, I wouldn't really recommend this film. It's got the idea of devoting a film to Frenchie is nice, but it's tainted by his personality. The ideas of showing Harlem in this kind of realist slice of life way is cool, but tainted by him being over your shoulder the entire time.
Yeah.
Overall, Khalik is just too obnoxious for me to connect with the film, and eventually it became a self-indulgent, stonery, self-aggrandizing, frustrating watch for me. So I can't really recommend this.
Okay, brilliant. Right. Thank you very much for listening. Go look at all our social medias and all that. They're linked down below. Like the video if you enjoyed it, and subscribe if you really enjoyed it. So Josh, what, on a more exciting note, what are we going to be talking about next week? Is this the switcheroo? I don't believe it is, actually.
Yeah, next week we're talking about Black Country New Roads for the first time, the debut album from Black Country New Road. And we got a guest, Gabriel, back to discuss that with us.
Hell yeah. It'll be nice to hear from him again. Okay, so yeah, like I said, thank you very much for listening. Check out Khalik's photography and have a nice day. Bye.